So, so a lot of people really say that other test prep companies have reviews too. How do I know that there's a real person behind them? And so if you go to e-GMAT.com, one of the things that we've done is we've actually linked our students' LinkedIn profiles with the reviews. And as I said, our students are very passionate about us as a company, so they allow us to do so. And so you can check them out. That there's a real person behind it. You can figure out who that person is, what is he or she doing, and where are they studying. So that's something that I think is very reassuring to people. Um, but e-GMAT faculty, and this is, let's say, as of today, about half our list of faculty over here. But one thing that I'd really say is what you'd see is it's the best in the business, and it's all composed of people who could have done anything or with their lives. So, for example, Chiranjeev, who's our co-host today, let me actually use some annotations here. Chiranjeev is a graduate of IIM Ahmedabad. He was a banker with Yes Bank, and prior to joining e-GMAT. And not only that, he did pretty well on test prep. He had a 99.98 percentile on the CAT, which is the Indian equivalent of GMAT, and a 770 on the GMAT. Krishna, who probably is somewhere in the session as well, is again one of the top. He's a graduate of BITS Pilani, and for those of you who don't know what BITS Pilani is, it's equivalent to Princeton University over here in terms of an engineering college. It has a similar reputation. Again, a topper on both CAT and GMAT, and he is there with us full time because he loves the education field and he loves helping you ace the GMAT. Prior to starting e-GMAT, I ran a $25 million business with Honeywell in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. In fact, I grew it from $2 million in 2007 to $25 million in 2011. Similarly, Pyle worked with Honeywell Space Systems and NASA, and again, is from Pittsburgh. So again, this is half our faculty list. In fact, we have added another set of 6 folks to our list of faculty members, and we have folks who are graduates from said School of Business, Oxford, IIM Calcutta, and all of these people work full time for e-GMAT. When you have people who work full time, you can get a lot done, and the dedication actually shows in some of the achievements that we've had over the last few years. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago to be precise, GMAT Club held a competition which was the best presenter competition. This was when they reached 1 million posts and to celebrate that milestone. Um, and and as a part of this competition, they invited every test prep company to present on a topic. e-GMAT, Shraddha from e-GMAT presented on reading comprehension, and she won that competition. In fact, her presentation and her YouTube video received 20,000 views in less than 24 hours. So again, you can really see how we've actually had a lot of our community members ace the GMAT. In terms of our courses, we fundamentally offer 2 courses. One is Verbal Online. Verbal Online is basically the world's most comprehensive online course. And when you think about Verbal Online, think of it as a book replacement. If you're looking to study from a book, Verbal Online gives you a source which is much more effective to study from, and it's much more comprehensive. It comes with our e-GMAT, FCCR, RC, and IR courses, along with with tons of mocks, GMAT club tests, and a lot of other freebies. Fundamentally, it's the world's most reviewed and world's most comprehensive self-paced learning course. Verbal Live Prep uh, offers everything that e-GMAT offers, that Verbal Online offers. In addition to that, it also adds about 36 hours of live sessions, and it also adds workshops. Let me ask a question. How many of you over here are retakers? Have taken the GMAT once already? Let me put this question over here. Clear all answers. How many of you are retakers? All right. So we have about 51 retakers over here. For retakers, Verbal Live Prep offers a score improvement guarantee. Fundamentally, the guarantee is very simple. If you have a score out of 60, let's say you have a 30 out of 60, we guarantee that you'll improve to 34 out of 60. Otherwise, you get your money back. If you have a 36 out of 60, we guarantee that you'll improve to 40. Otherwise, you get your money back. Here is, we are starting, as I said, our batch today. And this is where we are. Um, Out of this, we actually give out a few sessions free of charge, and here is the list of sessions that we give out free of charge with Verbal Live Prep. Again, as you can really see that the batch starts today and it ends on 18th of May. And for those of you who do not have this calendar, you can download the same over here. So, and again, fundamentally, if you compare this to any other course out there, you would find that it's way more comprehensive than any other course, and it's designed for working professionals. So all sessions do take place on weekends. And yes, this covers the entire verbal syllabus. That's one of the reasons why it's called Verbal Live Prep. We do not cover quant; we cover verbal comprehensively. One of the other options that we offer, and I think I'm getting towards the end of my presentation, probably just this is the last slide, is that anyone who buys Verbal Live Prep gets access for 6 months, which means you can join multiple batches. So over here, we have another batch that's starting from April 26th. So you can attend the current batch, which is starting today, or you attend the April 26th batch, or even the next batches that start after that. So whatever batch we start in the next 6 months, you'd have the ability to join those. So again, you can see how it compares with other test prep offerings from other test prep companies. Whether you look at the number of hours, whether you look at the guarantee that is offered, or whether you look at the price, it's a great deal. Okay. With that, let's move right into the session. Okay, a couple of questions. When is the next batch starting? The next batch is starting today. If you miss a session, you can always view the recordings. In fact, you get access to an entire set of recording the moment you join. So we have students who've taken the course by just using the recordings and have done very, very well. For example, we've had a few students who were doctors, and doctors usually have to work and study during their own time. Another question is, in the best practices, we say that we should start with SC first. So how do we account for this over here? Because in this batch, we're starting with CR first. So one of the things that we have done is, we always like that you do sentence correction first, and to incorporate the benefits that you get from studying sentence correction first. We've actually done that in our inference session, because fundamentally the benefit of doing SC first is that when you read a statement, you're able to understand it better. And as you will go through the inference session, you would realize that we've been able to deliver those benefits by modifying the inference session. And yes, you will be ready for GMAT by the end of this batch. Again, I'll talk a bit more about this towards the end of this session. Let me actually clear all questions, and at the end of this session, I'll spend another 20 minutes. Okay, another question. Most of your students and tutors are from India. Have you had students from Middle East as well? We currently have students from close to 45 countries, and yes, we do get a lot of students from Saudi Arabia. We get students from Oman, and pretty much. Actually, we've had a few students from South Africa as well. So not just Middle East, but certain part of Africa as well. So overall, about 45 countries. US actually is our biggest market. So with that, let's move right into the session. And guys, I'll be happy to spend another 20 minutes at the end of the session after the session is over. So uh, this session is kind of divided into two parts. In the first part, we're going to talk about defining your GMAT strategy. And when you think about defining your GMAT strategy, we'll talk about defining your target split between quant and verbal. How much effort you put on quant versus verbal, and so on. And then from there on, we'll talk about how do you set up a plan. And then when we talk about a plan, we'll talk about a very, very high level plan. And again, the reason for that is every e-GMAT student gets a study plan template in Excel, which you can customize based on this. So that will be the first part of the session. The second part of the session, which is going to be about 60% of the session, we'll talk about core skills, and we'll talk about we'll focus on ability versus accuracy, two terms that you'll see us using a lot in this session. And our goal would be to make sure that when you're studying, you actually study in the right way. You focus your time and energy on the right things. And then throughout this, we'll actually refer back and forth, because for most people, studying for the GMAT is an iterative process where, when you read a particular piece of information or a particular content, it's not that you just read through it and you say, okay, because I've read through it, I've mastered that content. So we're going to really talk about how we're going to go back and forth and really see how the strategy that you decided early on, and when your execution, how would that impact some of the decisions that you take during the execution phase. All right. So my goal today is to kind of have you answer these three questions, and if I'm able to have you do that, then I'll find myself I'll be very happy at the end of this session. The three questions really are: how are you going to approach your preparation from now on? Improving your understanding about what are the core skills that are tested on the GMAT, and why is that important? And the third thing is, as you go into the learning phase, which is the second part of the session, how will you evaluate whether you're learning or improving, or not? And if you're not improving, what would you do as a consequence? Okay, with that, let's move forward. And guys, I understand you guys have a lot of questions about verbal iPrep. I see them popping in the Q&A pod. Trust me, 80% of those questions will be answered through the session itself, directly or indirectly. So if you can sit tight, then you'll get an answer which is much better answer than what I'd give you verbally. Okay, so let's come back, and if you focus on the session, everyone, including yourself, will get a lot out of the session. So let's talk about the word strategy, and what does strategy mean, and why do we need one? So very, very simple. Let's put in a poll over here, and just let me clear all answers. Here is a question: when you think about the word strategy, what do you understand from it? What does the word strategy mean? You can type in your answers. Okay, I've gotten 23 answers. Let's see if we can get about 80 answers over here. 46, 48, 51, 52, 59, 63, 68. Wow. 72, 76, 80. Okay, we have 80. That is wonderful. Let me broadcast the results, and we now have 89. Let's see, can we get one more and touch 90? Perfect. I'm going to end the poll, guys, so that everyone can scroll through and look at the answer. So the question was, what is strategy? And most of you have answered it well, I must say. You've used the word planning in it. You've used the word goal in it, which is very, very important. And And I think so. I think most of you have some sort of an understanding. Some of you have used the word develop a study plan. A study plan technically is not a strategy. A study plan is an outcome of a strategy, but the strategy is kind of at a level which is higher than just a study plan. But most of you have gotten it right, and a strategy is a plan of action designed to do what it's designed to achieve a particular goal, and I think this being the most important piece. So a strategy is always goal driven, and so and we'll talk about design. What does designed to achieve a particular goal really mean with in the context of strategy? Um, and let me actually get some data for you. Just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so the question really is, what will be the GMAT score that you'd be happy with? And again, remember the question is, what will be the GMAT score that you'd be happy with? And I think there's an overlap between 650 to 700. It should be 660 to 700, and 710 to 720. So let's get some answers. And if you would respond in the poll question, that would be very helpful. So let's see, how many answers do we have over here? We have 154 answers out of the 210 or so. And let me actually close the poll and broadcast the results. Right. So so basically, and the reason I kind of worded this question, what is the GMAT score that you'd be happy with, is because a lot of in the past when I've asked this question, what is your target GMAT score, I see 80% of the class at 760 plus, and don't we all love that, right? We all target a 760 plus score. So this time I thought I'll ask the question slightly differently. I've gotten and there you see 800. So and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that you've got to be at a certain point to score 800. Just the nature of the test. But coming back to this, let's kind of look at this distribution, and what we really see is there are folks who would be happy with a score between 600 and 650. And then we have a few of you, about 11% of you, would be happy with a score between 650 and 700. Then we have another 25% who are aiming a score between 700 and 720, and then but half the class, so actually about 60% of you are looking for a score which is better than 730. So let's kind of keep that stat in mind, and we'll put this in context in the next two slides. Okay, so let's keep this stat in mind over here. So about 60% of the class is looking for a score which is better than 730. Let's come back to the strategy, and we're going to really link this data to the strategy in a couple of slides. Okay, so we know what a strategy is. It's a plan of action designed to achieve a particular goal. Then let's look at what is a good strategy, because there are many strategies to achieve a goal. A good strategy is something that provides the maximum benefit with the least input. And how does it do that? It does that by capitalizing on your strengths and by overcoming your weakness. So very important that we understand that. And there are a few hallmarks of a good strategy. So and even though they're very high level, a few of you who started your preparation would actually identify with A, either these hallmarks, or B, the fact that you haven't been following them, and you've kind of been suffering because of that. First of all, it's goal driven. I think most people understand that. The second thing is a good strategy starts with an analysis of your current situation. And when I really talk about the analysis of your current situation, it kind of looks at the kind of profession you have, your background, it looks at your starting score versus your target score, and it looks at how much time can you spend during the weekdays versus during the week. And it has a very realistic expectation of it. How many of you, for example, planned when you started your preparation to spend, let's say, 2 hours per day on preparing for the GMAT, but haven't been able to do so? How many of you plan to spend 2 to 3 hours per day preparing for your GMAT but have not been able to do so? Select yes if you haven't been able to do so. Select no if you have been able to do so. So you can see some data over here, but 70% of you thought you'd be able to spend a certain amount of time preparing for the GMAT, but haven't been able to execute on that. Okay, and again, which means you didn't analyze the situation as well as you should have. Um, Another piece which a good strategy should really have is that should have good assumptions about yourself. Most of you are 24 years or older, and you've had a fair amount of learning life prior to this. So you know how you learn the best. You know how long does it take for you to learn something new. Do not assume that if your friend was able to ace the GMAT in a month, then it's going to take you, then you'd be able to do the same. Or if your friend took 6 months to ace the GMAT, then you will need the same amount of time to ace the GMAT. And because a lot of us do that. Everyone learns at a different pace. Everyone has a slightly different personal situation, and so having looking at someone else's situation and assuming the same would apply to you, taking someone else's study plan and using it is not a good idea in a lot of scenarios. And then, of course, once you've done 2 and 3, after doing one, then you plan and execute. And if you're not able to execute, then you rethink your strategy. Okay, but bottom line really is a good strategy is personal. It is something that you devise, not just take it from someone, even if it's coming from me. And it has numerous checks in place to ensure that you're moving in the right direction. So let's kind of have some understanding on the key terms, and let me actually ask this question over here. How many of you understand what the word percentile means? It's probably the most important term on the GMAT. Select yes if you understand what the term percentile means. Select no if you do not. Again, this seems to be a group that is much more smart than what we've had in the past. Usually in the past, well, about 15% of the people don't understand the term percentile. There are about 10% over here. So let me just briefly breeze through it. So your percentile, and thank you very much for responding. Your percentile is your relative rank out of a population, and on the GMAT, approximately 250K people take the GMAT every year. So in the GMAT context, your percentile is basically your rank out of the 250,000 folks. So if you score 650 on the GMAT, your percentile, and I think these numbers may have probably still very correct. They're about 3 months old. But if you score 650 on the GMAT, your percentile is 77. But what it really means is that you're better than 192,000 students who take the GMAT. And again, remember the base that you're taking is 250K, which means that you have 57,000 students who scored the same or better than you on the GMAT. Similarly, if you score 740 on the GMAT, your percentile is 97. What it really means is you have only 7,500 students who have a score better than you on the GMAT, have done better than you on the GMAT. And 760, of course, I think most people understand is 99 percentile, which means that there are very few students who are better than you. Now, if you look at the top 10 colleges, and if GMAT is one of the metrics that they look at, and if you add up the number of seats that the top 10 colleges offer, that number is close to 3,500 or so. So considering that only half the 99 percentiles go in the top 10 colleges, if you have a 760, your probability of getting into one of the top 10 increases tremendously. So let's look at a couple of other key terms. accuracy is the percentage of questions that you answer correctly. I think most people understand what accuracy is. Let me ask a question which is probably a more interesting question. Um, what do you think is the definition of the word ability? And let me put a question over here. What is the definition of the word ability? So we've talked about accuracy. What does ability mean? Let me reopen the poll. I'm sorry. Let's reopen the poll. You can now type in your answer. Think about it, and because we're going to use this term. Okay. Folks have said capability, skill set. Let's get about 50 responses to over here. So let me end the poll. We have close to 70 responses right now. Let me broadcast the results. Actually, 73 right now, 74. So folks have actually linked accuracy to ability. And again, remember, we're talking in the context of the GMAT, not in the true context. In the true context, the word ability really means the capability to do something. A lot of you kind of identified it reasonably well. But in the context of the GMAT, and when I say in the context of the GMAT, the reason I say that is very, very important here is because GMAT isn't rocket science. Most of you who are here have the ability to do well on the GMAT given enough time and given enough preparation, depending on again where you're starting from. But really, ability, which is a measure at a point in time, is when put in context, your percentile in a section. Because again, remember, the GMAT is a very comparative exam, and what I'm going to really prove to you with some data is that a lot of us actually mistake accuracy to ability, and which actually is a very big mistake in that a lot of students do, and it leads them to do all sorts of wrong things. Because accuracy is a very, very simple measure. Ability, not so simple, but I think a much more useful measure. But fundamentally, in the context of the GMAT, it's your percentile in a particular section and or subsections. So let's kind of keep this as a definition, and let's see by the end of the session if you agree with me or not. And again, as you can see from the score, when it comes to the GMAT, your percentile is a true measure. And again, 760 is merely an outcome of you being a certain percentile. Okay, it's not the other way. So with that, let's move forward. Let's build some more common ground to understand how does GMAT scoring work. Let's kind of understand your opinion about verbal scoring versus quant scoring. And let me ask a poll. So how many of you think that that GMAT scoring favors verbal over quant? And what I'm really talking about is that your verbal score in the end has a higher impact on your overall GMAT score than quant. Let's get a few more responses. Let me get another poll question, which is, for those of you who are saying yes in this, and let me close this poll. We have a good 150 responses or so. For those of you who are who've said yes that GMAT scoring does favor verbal over quant, how do you figure? Where did you understand that, or how did you come to this conclusion? You can type in your answers in this question over here. Okay. Okay, there's some really interesting answers that I see over here, and we've gotten close to 50 answers, and I'm gonna end the poll because I don't think there's can be a larger variety of answers that I can get. Very interesting answers, by the way. I'm gonna end the poll. I'm gonna broadcast the results. Um, so so let's kind of look at this over here, and someone says it's written everywhere on the net in private classes, and I'd like to love to know that. Someone also said, I've taken the GMAT 3 times, so I know. Again, let's look at that. Um, Someone said non-natives are worse. Seems like a reasonable. The reasoning seems very interesting over here. And someone says 41 in verbal is equivalent to 46 in quant. Actually, it's not. 41 in verbal is equivalent to actually beyond 15 quant. So we'll look at that as well. And someone says I'm an engineer, so quant comes naturally. And based on that, they've concluded that GMAT scoring, because GMAT cares so much about you, focuses more on is much more dependent on verbal than quant in general. So let's look at this. And by the way, let me broadcast the results over here. 70% of you thought about this. Now, one thing that I want to really let's get some other data point over here, because this will all fit in context very well in about 2 minutes. So let's give me 1 second. So what's your strength, quant, verbal, or neither? Let's look at this data. What's your strength? Is your strength quant? Is your strength verbal? Or do you think neither is your strength? Okay, I'm gonna give 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We got again over 150 responses, and 65% of you say quant's your strength, and 25% say neither. Only but 10% of you say verbal is your strength. So fundamentally, as a group, non-natives tend to be a quant-heavy group. Okay, and that's one piece. The second piece is, trust me, if so this is a myth, by the way, because if this were true, no one would be happier than I would be. Okay, and the reason why we actually bring this up in the strategy session is because our customer set tends to be very strong in quant, yet at the end of our batch, and when we get the results, what we find out is people have done quite well on verbal, but their quant scores are not as good. And what it really leads to is the lack of focus on quant, which leads to unrealized potential. Remember when I talked about good strategy? A good strategy is something that leverages your strengths and then puts enough input to overcome your weakness. And at the end of your GMAT, nothing hurts more than really saying, okay, I didn't leverage my strength, which was quant. And let me prove this to you that both quant and verbal are equally important when it comes to GMAT scoring. Okay. Let me clear these answers. Let me clear these answers over here as well. Now, to set this context, does everyone agree that percentile is a true measure of your ability in a particular section when it comes to GMAT? Does everyone agree? Your quant percentile and your verbal percentile, you can type yes over here or no over here if you, right? Percentile is a true measure, right? Because GMAT is a comparative exam. So most of you say yes, a few of you say no, but let's look at this. So let's look at 700. I'm going to use 700 as a score, baseline score, to look at this. So here is some data over here. What data really shows is what is it that you need to do to score 700. You can score 700 if you score 47 on quant, which is 70 percentile, okay, and 39 on verbal, which is 88 percentile, right? You can also score 700 if you score 50 on quant, which is 89 percentile, and 34 on verbal, which is 70. If you look at what I've kind of just done is I've just crisscrossed the quant and verbal percentiles, and your end score is the same, right? So this was what I call as a lopsided score, all right? Uh, let's look at another set of scores. You can score 700 if you scored 49 on quant, which is 81 percentile, and 36 on verbal, or 48 on quant, which is 76 percentile, and 37 on verbal, right? So really, if you crisscross the quant and verbal percentiles, even when you have much more balanced scores, you still end up getting to the same score. And you can do this for any score up to 760, which is 99 percentile. For any score up to 760, you'll find this relationship holds true. In fact, there's a linear chart between, if you look at the quant percentiles and verbal percentiles, you can draw a straight line over there. But fundamentally, the examples for that those experts give you, all of those examples are based on a verbal score which is greater than 46. For those of you who recall that from memory, you'd see that those examples, in those examples, they show students who have verbal score higher than 46, which means higher than 99 percentile, which is a scale that we don't have on the quant section. And by the way, there are less than 1,000 students in that group. For those of you who recall those examples, you remember the verbal scores that they are over here, where they say verbal is way more important than quant? Right? And they were much higher verbal scores, much higher than what a regular non-native would score. Again, trust me, we are a verbal focused company. So we would love to have verbal being more important than quant, but in the end, my goal is to make sure that you do well on the GMAT and you score really well. And in fact, one of our recent success stories scored a 93 percentile on verbal, ended up scoring a 70 percentile on quant, and was only able to get 710. And that was really heartening because having done well on verbal, quant was a relatively easier thing to do. So we've already seen this misconception, and so that's something we've addressed, and hopefully most of us are on the same page. The second piece, which is very important, which a lot of people think is very important, is an 80-80 split. For those of you who don't know what an 80-80 split is, 80-80 split, what it really means is that you must get at least an 80 percentile on quant and or an 80 percentile on verbal to get into an Ivy League school. It's not true, is what I would say. The truth really is that an overall GMAT score is much more important than getting an 80-80 split. If I were to ask you to do a litmus test on this, if you ask any outcome what is their mean GMAT score for the school, everyone would know. I'd say 99% would know what is the mean and median GMAT score, what is the 80 percentile spread. I mean, they really track that number. And Priyanka, I'm going to respond to that. But if you ask them which applicant would you prefer, one with a 700 and the other one with a 670, if you were to make a choice purely on the basis of the GMAT score, 9 out of 10 times they're going to get this. They're going to like the 700 guy. Okay, AdCom is admission committee. Okay, so there was a question that Priyanka had to really say. What about Booth? Actually, in Booth is a very quant-focused school. Booth actually has more economists as their professors than anyone else. If you have a lower quant score, they'll worry about you. So similarly, if you go to Stern School of Business, if they have a lower quant score, they'll worry about you. The only place where they may want to see an 80 percentile on verbal is basically a school like INSEAD, which was in France, where they want to make sure that you'd be able to understand instruction in English, and that again requirement is much more for French students, where English isn't the first language, but it's not as much for students who've done their schooling in English. So as Jagan, you said, INSEAD clearly mentions, and again, the reason they mention is because it's for the French students. Precisely. If you think about it, for French, it makes sense. Because if you haven't done your school and you want to make sure your verbals at a certain percentile. So with that, let's kind of move into we have a common understanding of the GMAT, and let's look at if you want to score 700. And the reason I have 700 is because 700 seems to be kind of a mental block for a majority of the group over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all of this everyone in three different segments, because we have over 210 people here in the session. And we're going to divide everyone into a quant whiz, an engineer, or a commerce or an art student, and we're going to typecast people. Usually I don't like doing that, but for everyone's benefit, just on this slide, and we'll do that. So a quant whiz by definition is someone who has an ego about quant and who wants to do really, really well on quant. So if you are a quant whiz, you want to ace the quant section, not just because you want to ace the GMAT, but because you can't getting a perfect score, not getting a perfect score on quant. Okay, an engineer on the other hand is someone who's really good in quant, but doesn't have that ego. So it's not so good that he or she wants to really ace the quant section, but is really, really good in quant. And for our definition, a commerce and an art student is someone who's not good in quant. Now, there are commerce and art students who are good in quant, and they would fall in one of these buckets over here, either an engineer or a quant whiz. Okay. So if you are a quant whiz and if you want to score 700, again, first leverage your strengths. Make sure you get a decent quant score, and correspondingly your target verbal score should be lower. Remember, your strategy is quant driven. You're really good in quant. What it really means is you should make sure that in a mock test your quant scores at least 49 before you start preparing for verbal. Okay, so that's something which is very, very important. On the other hand, if you're an engineer, again, your strategy is still quant driven, and you should still first focus on quant before you move on to verbal. And again, I would say you should get at least 47, most likely 48 on quant before you start focusing on verbal. And the reason for that is if you are in one of these two buckets, it's going to take you way less than 10 days to get done with quant. And it will be a mental block which would be done. Then, if you're a commerce or an art student, the last thing that you should really so then your strategy, quant really doesn't matter over here. What you should really focus on is either quant or verbal. Take on one section and move forward from there. Okay. So fundamentally, as we talked about, what you really need to do is to make sure that you capitalize on your strengths first before moving on to your weakness. I have a few questions here. Someone's said that how can you get a 46% quant when you only have 37 questions? So both your quant and verbal sections are scored out of 60, regardless of the number of questions that you get. And so yeah, that's basically the answer. So let's move on. And again, if you are weak in quant, then you should either start with quant or verbal. I think bottom line really is if you have one section that is your strength, then you need lesser time to prepare for the GMAT. If you need to work on both the sections, then you need more time. If verbal is your strength, the opposite is true for you. You can ace the verbal in less time and focus most of your energy on quant. Okay, so fundamentally at e-GMAT, I talk about what I call as a high-level two-phase study plan. And in the first phase, what we do is we actually work on our core skills. We learn the core skills. We study without focusing on how long it takes us to answer a particular question. We are in what we call as the learning phase. And in the second step, we are in the refinement phase. So overall, if you are a non-native, you should park about 160 to 200 hours to to ace the GMAT. In terms of when should you take the mocks, you should take the mock always, upfront while you start preparing for the GMAT, and then you should take about 5 mocks before you take your actual GMAT. Priyanka has a great question. Should we do one subject at a time, or all of them together? For non-natives, I always recommend that they do one subject at a time. In fact, if you look at our study plans, if you look at how our courses are outlined, that's how they are outlined. And if, because in this phase you're going to learn the core skills in each subject, and I don't want you as working professionals to focus on 2 things on one day. It simply isn't very effective. Okay. So most people are able to do this in about 45 days. My assumption here is that you're spending about 20 hours per week, and so which is about 2 hours per day during the weekdays and 4 hours per day during the weekends, and you have 2 days off in a month. Okay. Again, for e-GMAT students, we do expect you have that you have official guide and other relevant material. So very quickly, to take the use case of an engineer who's recently scored 560 on his or her first mock, the recommendation that I would really have is, because this guy is an engineer, you tackle quant, then you study SC, CR, and RC. And in terms of where do you study from, how you tackle quant is based on mocks. Look at your strengths and weaknesses to do so. Then study SC based on the SC study plan, CR study plan, and RC study plan. And in terms of the amount of time that you approximately need, this is the amount of time that you need to finish these sections. And this is where you'd study these from. So again, for e-GMAT students, we do not expect you to study from any other resource other than e-GMAT e-learning courses, our live sessions, and OG12 or OG13, depending on whichever book you have, and the verbal review. Okay. One very important thing that I want to make sure you guys really do is you take the study plans that come with your purchase receipt. You look at that. And yes, this time does include both prep and practicing questions. Yes, Rohit. So in the e-GMAT study plan, for those of you who have that, what you really see is you actually have a set of practice questions in the study plan itself. So and why not OG13? OG13 or OG12? We support both, but we only support verbal review 2nd edition, not the first one. All right, let me just clear all questions. I think most of them have been responded to. Should OG be a starting point? Absolutely not. Again, Priyanka, use the study plans that we provided to you. So again, it gives you, it itemizes everything, what is it that you need to do on at every step. So I think we have some older version of the study plan over here. Otherwise, you can also get them from our blog. Let me see if I can. As an older version of the study plan, the latest study plan, please go to e-GMAT.com/blogs to download the study plan. Okay, let's kind of move to accuracy versus ability, and what is the difference and why is it that it's important. So to understand the importance of ability, let's understand the GMAT scoring algorithm. And this is something that we talked about in the last session as well. So for those of you who were in the last session, the next 10 minutes are going to be a repeat. But after that, we're going to solve a few real GMAT questions. So make sure you guys come back because that's when the fun starts. So what we really have over here is basically how the GMAT works, and again an approximation of how the GMAT work, and we've at the bottom we have what we call as question numbers, starting from question number 1 to question number 6, and on the blue and the, I think this is the red, I'm colorblind, so forgive me for that. We have 2 students who basically are attempting these questions. So let's take student 1, or case 1 as we call it over here. Let's assume that student 1 actually gets the first question right. when student one gets the first question right, he gets a question. The second question is much more difficult than the first question. Let's assume he gets the second question right. Then the third question is more difficult than the second question. Then let's assume he gets that wrong. Then he gets a question which is more difficult than the second question, but less difficult than the third one. Uh, then let's assume that he gets that correct or that wrong. I'm sorry. Then he gets a question which again is somewhere in between in terms of difficulty. Let's take case two. In case two, student two gets the first question wrong. Then he gets a question that is easier than the base question. Remember, the first question is always at a 560 or a 570 level, which is the median score on the GMAT. So he gets an easier question. Let's assume he gets that right. He gets a more challenging question, something that's between the median question and question number one, and question number two, I'm sorry. Then if he gets that wrong, he gets a question which is between question number two and question number three. If he gets that right, then he gets a slightly more difficult question, and then as he gets that right, he gets a slightly more difficult question as well. So one of the things that you really see is both these students have answered 5 questions, and they're at this point, which is the 6th question point. Let me make this white over here, so or yellow, so that it's much more legible. So very simple question. Which student do you think is doing well over here? Which student is scoring high over here? And let me clear our answers. If you think student 1, then select yes. If you think student 2, then select no. Case 1, select yes. Case 2, select no. So pretty much everyone agrees that student 1 is doing better than student 2. Even though student 1's accuracy is the same as that of student 2. Student 1 has answered 5 out of 3 questions, and student 2 has answered 5 out of 3 questions correct. So there are 3 ticks and 2 reds, 2 crosses for both of them. The reason why student 1 is doing better is that all his 5 questions are above the average difficulty level, and whereas for student 2, only his 6th question is above the average difficulty level. Actually, the first question is at the average difficulty level over here. So what it really means is to do well on the GMAT, you need to do a couple of things. First of all, so we've seen both of them have 60% accuracy. But there are 2 challenges to do well on the GMAT. The first challenge is to get difficult questions. So think about it this way. Every question slot is an opportunity. And the more challenging the question that you get in that question slot, the higher is the opportunity that you're creating. So the first challenge that is there is to get difficult questions. The second challenge that is there is to answer them correctly. Okay, so to do well on the GMAT, you need to do those 2 things. In fact, at a very high level, your end score out of 60, which is your percentile in a particular section, whether it's quant or verbal, is a weighted average of the difficulty levels of questions that you get right. Because remember, you only get points for the questions that you get right. You do not get points for the questions that you don't get right. So let's kind of move forward and show you some more data that we got from one particular student over here. So this data is screenshot is basically derived from GMAT prep software. It actually comes from the same student over here, and his 2 attempts of GMAT prep on the same by the same guy. What you really see are really the question numbers in red are the question numbers that the student got answered incorrectly, and I'm going to ask for some guesses over here. Let's call this case 1, and let's kind of get a poll over here and see what do you think was the student score in case number 1? What do you think was the student score in case number 1? You can answer you put in your answer over here. So again, out of 60, not 700 or something. Remember, this is just verbal. Out of 60, what was his score out of 60 on the verbal section? I can actually, I'm sorry, I can ask you to put this again. Let me clear all answers. Why don't you put the score once again? What was his score out of 60? This guy answered 9 questions incorrectly. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, 9 questions incorrectly. What do you think was the score out of 60? Okay, we have 51, 57. Let's get 100 responses. 9 questions incorrect. What do you think was the score out of 60? Okay, 75 responses so far, 78. You people should love to guess or love to estimate. Okay, let me broadcast the results. We have 86 responses. So a lot of you have said scores in 40. Okay, some of you have said actually low 30s as well, but majority of you have said scores in 40. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to clear all answers. What do you think student 2 score, this score was in this attempt? Here he has again 11 questions incorrect, and the only exception being the first 2 questions are incorrect. So a good number of you are putting scores in 30s as well. So again, this is very close to the real data. I'm going to broadcast the results again. We have 83 responses, 84 responses so far, 86. So both of them after the first 10 questions, and this is after the first 10 questions, have the same accuracy, 71%, right? So student 1, well, in this attempt, this guy got a verbal score of 32, whereas in this attempt, this guy got a verbal score of 43. If you think about it, what 43 really means on verbal is 97 percentile. What it really means is his rank on verbal was 7,500, whereas over here his rank on verbal was 65 was 87,500. Again, same person, and you can really see the difference. And what it really kind of tells you is that so what really happened when I talked to him after this guy actually ended up scoring a V35 in the actual GMAT. So when I talked to him after analyzing this, he sent these 2 reports to me and he said, "What do I do? Which one do I think is the real one?" I asked him, "I was like, how many repeats were there?" And in this particular attempt, this guy had 3 or 4 repeats. He knew 3 or 4 questions, and that made an impact on his overall end score. So, but one thing that I want to impress upon us, and this is real GMAT prep data, is that again the points that we actually discussed last on the previous slide. Ability versus accuracy ability is a much more true measure than accuracy. That's first thing, and the second thing that is there is that if you want to do well, you've got to be able to get more difficult questions and answer them correctly, which again comes from ability. So benefits of doing well on the first 10 questions. I think here is some data that was very well documented on GMAT Club, and what you really see is so Bunel, who's one of the GMAT Club moderators, he conducted certain simulations on GMAT prep software. What he did was he basically said, let me attempt the verbal section and do the first 30 correct and the last 11 incorrect. Okay, and he said in the end, when he did that, he scored a V38. He said, okay, I understand this. Now let me kind of move this to the middle 11. So I think he did the first 16 correct consecutively. Then he got 11 consecutive wrong answers, and then he actually got the remaining correct. He still ended up scoring a V38. But when he tried to repeat the same thing by doing the first 11 incorrect, then he ended up scoring a V22. And I think just the 22 versus 38 isn't as important, but when you look at the relative percentiles over here, you can really see it's a huge difference, 83 percentile versus a 22 percentile. So again, what really happens is when you do the first 11 incorrect, and this is not very surprising because If you do the first 11 incorrect, what the GMAT algorithm is thinking is that you really belong to a very low percentile skill set. And suddenly, after the 11th question, you're not going to become Superman and start doing every difficult question correct. So if you do the first few questions wrong, it doesn't give you as many difficult questions. I actually did this experiment where did the first 6 incorrect and I ended up getting a V33. So fundamentally, again, a lot of people may think that okay, this means the first 10 are very important, but that is not the case. Uh, what's important is that you have the ability, even if you spend a whole lot of time on the first 10 questions, if you do not have the ability, spending more time on the first 10 questions isn't going to help you answer them correctly. And we've done experiments on this. But yes, the first 10 questions kind of set the pace. So let's move to the next section, which is talking about the core skills that help you build the ability. And this is, I'd say, the fun section where we're going to solve some problems. And this turns out to be the most important factor that decides whether you score, a score which is less than 650 or a score which is higher than 700. And as we do that, let me ask another poll question. For those of you who've been preparing for some time, and this question is only for those of you who've been preparing for some time, have you experienced this situation where you start preparing, your score improves, and then after a certain point, it plateaus? Have you experienced a situation where you start preparing, your score improves initially, but then after that it plateaus? No matter how much you study, your score doesn't improve beyond that point. Okay. So, but 85% of you have seen this situation. We're going to talk about why that happened. We're going to try and establish causality. Because whether you're preparing for the test or whether you're running a business, establishing causality is the most wonderful thing that you can do. Why? Because once you establish causality, you can really repeat doing what you were doing and you can get the same result. So 85% of you have experienced that. And to understand that, let's kind of understand core skills in quant. And to do that, I'm going to actually have you solve a quant question. I want to give you a minute and a half to get to the right answer over here. Let me clear all answers and reopen the poll. And I'm going to have you solve this question. So spend about 90 seconds to get to the right answer. It's a very simple word problem. Another 60 seconds, 60 guys, 60 seconds. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me close the poll. And so I'm going to share the results with you guys. So just bear with me for a second. But let me ask another question, which is, how did you actually solve this question? How did you solve this question? And let me get the poll over here. Uh, and the option choices that are there with you are, let me, is by making equations, by number substitution, or by using a formula. How did you solve this question? Let's get a few more answers. We have what, a 94, close to 100 answers. Let's get 130, 140 answers. How did you solve this question? Did you solve it by making equations, by number substitution, or by using a formula? Okay, we have 111 answers so far. All right, let me broadcast the results. But 80% of you solve this question by making equations. But 18% of you did that by number substitution, and just one of you, or less than a percent, solve this question by using a formula. So thank you very much. So let me ask this. I'm going to move this poll over here. Why did you solve this question by making equations? Why did you do that? Why did you solve the question by making equations? Is that the shortest way to solve the question? Well, Preet, that's not the only way. There are the other two ways out there, and you've seen other people do that. Okay, it makes sense to me, and Rajesh says you're wired to do that. Yes. Someone says that's the only way that you know. Okay. So really, that's a response that I get in most of the sessions that I really conduct. That most people are wired to solve the question. And basically, what really happens is the moment you really see Jacob is now 12 years younger than Michelle, you actually start forming equations in your brain, right? You really just say m is equal to j plus 12. That starts to happen naturally, right? Does that happen with you? Yep. So our brains are wired to do that for quant. When do you think you learn how to solve a question such as this one? At what standard do you think you learn how to solve a question? Okay, most people learn it in 6th or 7th. That is correct, depending on the school that you go to. When do you think natives learn how to ace verbal, or natives learn CR or RC or SC? When do you think natives learn CR or RC or SC? They don't learn. Okay, so fundamentally, I think there are two takeaway points that I want to take away from this. One is, when our brains wired to do something, when we have that process ingrained in our brains to do something, then we solve it a lot more naturally with a lot less stress, right? We have neural pathways that are created in our brain to solve a lot of quant problems, but that's not the case with verbal. With verbal, we need to ingrain that process, and as you do that, you start to do a lot better. Now let's come to natives, and this is a very surprising data point that I'm going to share with you. Actually, let me just move a couple of slides ahead. And so about a year ago, I was actually looking for a school for my daughter. My daughter is studies here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was visiting certain schools, and this is a 3rd grade classroom. So as I visited certain schools, they allowed me to look at various classrooms, not just the kindergarten that she was starting with, but 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And this is a picture that I took from a 3rd grade classroom, and I'm going to just actually increase that. And this is when they were doing reading comprehension, this is what they were learning in RC. Again, their RCs weren't, GMAT level RCs, but they were looking at strategies, learning strategies to compare and contrast. They were learning how to think about author's purpose. They were learning cause and effect reasoning. They were learning the difference between fact and opinion, which, by the way, we're going to really discuss in the next bold-faced problem that we'll do in about 5 minutes. They were learning how to make inferences and what can be inferred and what cannot be inferred, and similarly, how to draw conclusions. Again, the strategies that they were using was to make connections, make predictions, visualize what is presented in the argument. Okay, a lot of the strategies that we actually teach you in the RC course as well as in the CR course, it's something that they learned when they were that they learned in the third standard. So one of the reasons why natives don't need to learn a whole lot of verbal, especially when it comes to RC, is because they learn it a lot earlier. And it's the same way that we learn word problems. Yes, this is a third class. This is third graders, yes. Okay. But fundamentally, the thing really is, the nice thing about this is all of these are core skills that you need to work on. Okay, let's kind of understand core skills, and I think it's very important to get to core skills if you understand quant. So let's come back to our problem. Remember, we did that this problem over here. What are the core skills that do you think that you need to ace this question? What are the core skills that you need? Okay, equations. All right. Logic. Forming or setting up an equation. Perfect. Working with variables. So you guys are kind of identifying most of the core skills. So the core skills that you need to ace this question are: you should be comfortable working with algebraic variables. You should be able to convert statements into equations, relate them, and solve them. Right? So these are the 4 core skills. Now tell me one thing: what would happen if the core skill that you were weak in, if the core skill that you were weak in was skill number 2, the ability to convert statements into equations, but the core skill that you worked on practicing was skill number 4, which is solving equations? What would happen? If you were weak in skill number 2, but you worked on solving equations, you would get to the wrong answer. It may not work, right? So remember, I asked you guys a question that have you guys experienced a stage where you keep on working, but your score doesn't improve beyond a certain point? Remember, we asked that. That is the reason why that happens. And I think it's very easy to illustrate this first with quant, because you understand how that can happen in quant. In the next problem, we're going to solve a bold-faced question, and we're going to really illustrate how, if you don't have the right core skills, you won't be able to improve regardless of the number of bold-faced questions you solve. Okay. By the way, how many of you love bold-faced questions? Okay. Let's do it. All right. Let's move forward. So we're going to solve this bold-faced question, and I'm not going to. So, well, you're going to start loving them very soon. Hopefully, you'll have some love for bold-faced questions. Excuse me, after we solve this question, and then more love for those of you after you attend the bold-faced session. And by the way, Chiranjeev over here, who's our co-host, conducts the bold-faced session, and he gets a really high rating. I think he got 9.3 out of 10 in his last session. Okay, let's kind of see how we're going to approach this. So, in a boldface question, for those of you who don't know what a boldface question really is, a boldface question presents an argument to you, and in that argument, you have a few statements that are bolded, and then the question asks you what is the role played by these statements, right? So the way we'll solve this question is going to be this. We're going to first read the argument. As we read the argument, we'll read each statement independently and we'll classify it. Okay. Then, as we read the next statement, we'll again do the same thing, read it and understand it. And but in addition to reading and classifying it, we're going to really see how it relates to the preceding statement. That's going to be very, very important. Okay. Once we've completed reading the argument, so we're going to do that for the entire argument. We're going to focus purely on the bolded statements, and we're going to see how they understand and relate to the conclusion. So for us to be able to do that, we should have understood what the main conclusion of the argument is already. Then we'll pre-think the answer, and the answer would really say boldface 1 is X, where X is a fact, opinion, observation, principle, a bunch of those terms, and whether it supports or refutes the conclusion or not. Once we've done that, so I'm going to do this step over here, and I'm going to do this step with you. Okay. And then we're going to evaluate the answer choices, and this is something that you're going to do on your own. So I am not going to do this with you. This is something that you will do on your own, and I'm going to bring in a poll question, and we're going to see how you do on this. Okay. So you evaluate each statement and each element in every answer choice and see whether that element is correct, and correspondingly whether that answer choice is correct. Because remember, if any element in any answer choice is wrong, that makes that answer choice wrong too. So with that, are you guys excited? All right. Let's try and stay focused. So let's look at the first statement. The first statement says stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large caps, rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. What does this statement say? It basically presents an information point to you that says for certain companies which are called extremely large caps, their stock prices rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. What is this? What is this statement over here? What does this statement present? It's a fact. You can also say present some background information. So it is about ELCs. Okay, you should never say a premise, because you can never, okay, what's the definition of a premise? What is the definition of a premise? Someone said a premise over here. Premise is not what is given. Premise is a piece of information. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fact. A premise is a piece of information that supports the conclusion, right? It's a piece of information that supports the conclusion. Now, can you say a statement as a premise if you don't know what the conclusion is? Right? So you can't really say something as a premise if you don't know where the conclusion is. Okay. So this one, you can actually call it anything. You can call it a fact, you can call it an observation, you can also call it a principle, because the way it's written, it may as well be a principle, right? So either all three of them are correct. Then let's move on to this. The second statement says it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the market. Okay, so a few things over here. So when you say it is commonly thought, when you look at this line of wording, what comes to your mind first? When you look at this line of wording, it's an opinion. Whose opinion? Yes, the thing that comes out is good. What Gunjan is saying, it's a common belief, but it doesn't seem to come from the author. Why? Because if the author said that, he would say this happens because blah 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 blah. He won't say it is commonly thought. right? It says the author says this might be true, but I'm not so sure of it, right? What the author is saying is I'm presenting someone else's belief, and over here that someone else's common belief, right? Or as Arnav is saying, it's the traditional viewpoint of people. It's a very important distinction that you need to understand. And why is it that you need to understand that? Because if it's not author's viewpoint, then what can you do? If it's not author's viewpoint, then you can dispute it. Or as Mr. Lee is saying, the author is hiding his knife behind perhaps, right? So the author lists a general belief, right? Okay. And there's something which is again very important over here. Because he says it is commonly thought this happens because what is most interesting? Because is a very interesting word. Why is that? Why is because a very interesting word? Because it states the region and it has cause in it. What it really means is it's establishing causality, right? Or justification or reasoning. So whenever you see because, always look at this and say, hey, is that causality always true? Then let's move forward. However, studies show that ELCs that provide higher returns in the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. So slightly longer statement, so let's read it a bit slowly. However, the moment you see however, it's a keyword, it's a contrasting keyword, it's a contradicting keyword. It says, however, studies show that ELCs, which ELCs? That provide higher returns in the market. So again, remember, the author is not talking about all ELCs over here. He's talking about a segment of those ELCs. Which ELCs? That provide a higher return in the market over a 5-year period. He says there's a characteristic of them, a majority of them are run by the founders. So the author presents another data point, and then you can really say he lists an exception, right? And he lists an exception to that bold exception, and that bold face, a majority of them are run by their founders, is a modifier in technical terms in SC, or it's a characteristic of the ELCs that provide higher return in the market, right? So this bolded statement is a characteristic of that segment of ELCs that provide higher returns in the market. Everyone's clear with that? Yes, Umesh, it does tend to get difficult now. But if you keep things simple, you won't see that difficulty. You won't feel that difficulty, right? Let's move on to the next statement. Since most ELCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse. What is the word since? What is the word since? For those of you who've gone through the e-GMAT free trial, what do we call since? What kind of a marker is since? It's a premise indicator. Yes, since is a premise indicator, right? What it really means is after since, most likely you're going to see a premise and then the conclusion would be coming after that. So since most ELCs are under professional management that are inherently risk averse. Now remember, the author has again switched gears. He's no longer talking about the ELCs that provide higher returns in the market. He's not talking about most ELCs, so almost all ELCs. And he says most ELCs are under professional management, and that professional management is inherently risk averse, right? So he brings that an additional fact to life, right? Prior to this statement, we did not know that A, most ELCs are under professional management, and B, that professional management is inherently risk averse. We didn't know that, right? So at the end of the statement, we know this. The study's findings strongly suggests that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not that they're too big to grow, but rather that they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. So what is this? What is this entire big block that I just brought to the screen? It's the conclusion, right? It's the author's conclusion. And What is this over here? The second boldface is the real explanation why ELCs don't grow, right? Remember, the author is not refuting that most ELCs don't grow. What he's really saying is that don't call them too big to grow. That's not the real reason. The real reason why they don't grow is because they're run by professional management that is too risk averse, right? This reason also refutes the accepted belief. Agreed? So far, so good, right? Was there anything that was super difficult in this? Not really. Okay. Okay. So let's look at what is boldface one. So let's now, so we've done the first step. Let's now classify what each statement is. Boldface one and boldface two. So what is boldface one? Is boldface one a fact or an opinion? Is boldface one a fact or an opinion? Boldface one is a fact, right? You cannot question a majority of them are run by their founders, right? It's a fact. Okay, now let me ask another question over here. So we know boldface one is a fact. That is wonderful. Now let me ask another question, which is, does boldface one support the author's conclusion or refute the author's conclusion? Let me reopen the poll. Does boldface one support the author's conclusion or refute the author's conclusion? Let's get 100 responses. Okay, let's get a few more responses. We have 86, 85 responses, 87, 89. I want to get 100 responses before I share the results. 97, 97 responses, 99, and 99 still. We need one more response. We have 100 responses right now, 101. Let me end the poll, 102 responses, and broadcast the results. 70% of you think boldface one supports the author's conclusion. 30% of you think boldface one, 29.4% to be precise, think it refutes. What's the litmus test to really say whether a statement supports or refutes the author's conclusion? What is the litmus test? No ambiguity. That's not a litmus test. Okay, negation. Yes, negation is a great test if you want to really do that. How many of you are comfortable with negation over here? Negation works perfectly well, by the way. How many of you are comfortable with negation? Okay. Okay. I'd say half and half. A few of you are, half of you are, half of you are not. So let's talk about a simpler test, which is a lot simpler to apply. Okay. What happens to the conclusion if boldface one were not present? If I remove boldface one from the argument, does the conclusion become less believable or more believable? If I remove boldface one, if I remove a majority of them are run by their founders, does the conclusion become less believable or more believable? It becomes less believable, right? It becomes less believable. My belief in the conclusion goes down. If I don't know that most ELCs that provide higher returns than the market, a majority of them are run by their founders, right? My belief in the conclusion is lowered. So if by removing a statement, if the conclusion becomes less believable, then that statement, what does it do? It supports the conclusion, right? And again, this test, while similar to the negation test, is a lot simpler to apply because you don't have to negate anything. All you have to do is remove that statement from the argument and really say what happens to the conclusion. Right? It's a lot simpler to apply. We call this a disappearance test, and it's proprietary to e-GMAT. And for boldface statements, it works beautifully. So let's look at pre-thinking. Alexandra, if you remove the bolded words, then you are actually removing the context of the entire statement. Right? Now, this is not a negation test. By the way, if you want to learn about the negation test, register for the next session, which is the pre-thinking session. And I have authored probably the world's most comprehensive article on negation test, which I think Chiranji would be happy to put in the chat pod. So let's look at what boldface 1 is. Boldface 1 is a character, it's a fact which is provided to support the author's conclusion, right? Let's look at boldface 2. Boldface 2 is actually the reason for the observed trend. It is the author's conclusion. It is the alternate explanation that the author provides, right? So everyone's okay with boldface 1, guys. Guys, stay here with me. I will be happy to provide this as well again at the end of the session. So everyone's there with me. Everyone understands what boldface 1 is and what boldface 2 is. All right, that is great. So now you guys shouldn't have any problem solving this question. So we are now at the most interesting part where I'm going to give you the answer choices and you will solve this question. I'm going to give you, let me give you 2 minutes to solve, to select the right answer. Okay, so that you have ample time to do so. All right, 2 minutes, guys. I'm going to be on mute. Last 10 seconds, folks. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me close the poll. So, how are the answer choices? How do you feel about selecting the answer choices? We got, let me see how many questions, how many responses. We got 108 responses overall. Okay, let me broadcast the results. So about but 49% of you answered this correctly. So so let's look at this. This is the 650 level question. So we expect about 60% of you to answer this correctly if you prepared. So let's look at this, right? So we're going to go through every answer choice and we're going to see why that is correct, because I think everyone, let me just bring back the answer choices, because we selected every answer choice over here. So 17% of the folks actually selected answer choice A, which is very, very which is not what should have happened. So let's look at the answer choices over here. The first choice says the first is a claim, the accuracy of which is at issue in the argument. The first is a majority of them are run by their founders, right? That's the first boldface. So is that a claim? Is the first a claim? Is the accuracy of first at issue in the argument? Do we dispute that a majority of them are run by their founders? Because this is wrong, you shouldn't even read beyond this and you should really say choice A is wrong. Okay, let's look at choice B. Choice B says the first is an objection. Can the first be an objection? Yes, no? The first actually can be an objection, a fact can, and the first is used as an objection against what? The first is used as an objection against what? The traditional view, thanks Arnab, yes, that ELCs are too big to grow. The author presents the first as an objection against the common belief, right, or the traditional view, or the view that ELCs are too big to grow. But let's see, is that what this answer choice is saying? The first is an objection that has been raised against a position defended in the argument, right? Generally, what is the position defended in the argument? Is the first raised against that position that is defended in the argument? Does the argument defend a position over here? Does the argument defend a position? Not at all. And because of this part of choice A, because of this part of choice A is wrong, that makes choice B wrong. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, let's look at choice E for elephant. Okay, the first provides evidence. Okay, is the first an evidence? Yes, it's an evidence. We can really say it's an evidence. Very good. So you guys are along with me. What the evidence to do what? Remember two. What is two? When we say the word two, what is two? The function of two is a purpose word. Yes, thank you, Joel. Two is always a purpose word. You are studying to ace the GMAT, right? The two is the purpose word over here. The pure purpose of your studies is to ace the GMAT, right? Objective, you can really say, Nitesh. The first provides evidence with an objective of refuting an explanation that the argument favors. Does the first refute an explanation that the argument favors? What is does the first refute this? No. An explanation that the argument favors, generally what is this piece? What is a single word in general for this piece? What is a single word in general for an explanation that the argument favors? It's the conclusion, right? In general, this is the conclusion. So does the first refute the conclusion? No, it doesn't. Because of that, choice E is wrong. Okay. So everyone's clear about choices A, B, and E? All right. All right. Let's look at choice D, D for delta. The first is evidence. We've already discussed that the first is evidence is correct. Which evidence that has been used to support an explanation that the argument challenges? Does the first support an explanation that the argument challenges? And I'm going to focus on the word challenges over here. What is the explanation that the argument challenges? ELCs are too big to grow, or the common belief. Does the first support that? The first doesn't support that. The first actually refutes that. Because of this, choice D is wrong. Okay, which brings us to our correct answer, which is choice C, which 50% of you got right. Okay, let's look at this. The first is evidence. We've already said that is correct. Which evidence that has been used to support an explanation that the argument favors? You already said the first supports the conclusion, right? The first supports the conclusion, and the second we already said is that explanation is the conclusion, right? That explanation. Remember, this explanation and this explanation refer to the same thing. And because this is correct, this is correct, and this is correct, choice C is correct. Does that help? Now, one of the things that is there is when you go step by step, all the questions become very, very simple, right? And this is a 650 level question. I'd say for this group, this is a 700 level question. If half the people get a question wrong, then that's a 700 level question. But we were able to get this right. Why were we able to get this right? We were able to get this right because we went step by step, and we're going to do a bunch of other things. In this manner, we're going to do a bunch of pre-thinking in the next critical reasoning session, which is next week. This is a 650 level question, in my opinion. This is an e-GMAT question. In my opinion, this is a 650 level question. Okay, but we're going to do a bunch of pre-thinking in the next session. So, which is the link for that is above. And really, Ramesh, we'll do that. You know, after at the end of the session, we'll solve one more question. Is this start in the session? So, Priyanka, before the boldface session, in fact, one thing that I always welcome people to do is our boldface section of the e-learning part of boldface is a part of our e-GMAT free trial. I recommend you actually go and look at that. So it'll help you with boldface tremendously. You have a good 20 full-length boldface questions. You have the core skills that you need to ace. Again, remember, this is just we did this for only 15-20 minutes or so. When you actually prepare for boldface with e-GMAT, you do the e-learning portion of it, which is about an hour and a half of practice and stuff that you'll do before you come into the session. And then we have a full 2.5 hour long session dedicated to boldface. So let's move forward. So I think, remember, so let's move back here. Remember, we talked about core skills. We talked about accuracy, ability, and core skills. I want to bring back because everything really comes down to those three terms. And remember, we also said, you know, your score doesn't improve beyond a point it reaches a plateau, but 85% of you kind of express that. Those of you who've been studying for some time. And the reason why that happens is because you're unable to improve on the core skills that you lack. So the first step towards doing that is to identify where is it that you lacked, or where is it, what made you make that mistake, right? So let me ask this question. Where is the question? Well, I can't seem to find it. But why is it that you were unable to solve this question correctly? For those of you, half of you did this right, the other half did not do this right. Why is it that you were unable to solve this question correctly? Was it because you weren't able to identify what the individual statements were? Was it because you weren't able to relate them to the conclusion? Or was it because you weren't able to relate the statements themselves? And think through it, because remember, unless and until you understand where you lack, you can't understand what to do next to ace this. For example, if you couldn't identify the individual statements, then that's a skill that you need to work on. If you couldn't understand how they're related to the conclusion, then that's a skill that you should work on, right? But having that takeaway is very, very important. And I think it's that kind of feedback that you get in those live sessions that we conduct. For example, in our boldface session, we have certain questions where identifying the conclusion is a bit of a challenge, but we have an intermediate conclusion and a main conclusion. And there are certain people who are unable to identify the conclusion. So for those students, we really say, hey, you've got to go back to the premise and conclusion to be able to identify, because if you're unable to identify a conclusion, you won't be able to solve a boldface question correctly, right? And once you understand that part of the weakness, then you can work on it, because remember, learning this is not difficult, right? So coming back to the core skills, and you should have this takeaway. And every time you solve a boldface question, you should know where is it that you lack, right? If you're able to really pinpoint this to 1, 2, 3, 4, and if you see that each one of these start to occur again and again, and they will, because if you lack a core skill, that is going to have you that's going to lead to you solving questions incorrectly again and again, not just once. And then you'll know that is what that's where you lack, and then you can invest in a resource to learn that. Okay, I'm not going to go through this. Let me actually move towards the end. So it's 9:04. We have another 10 minutes before we end the session. And I want to kind of make sure that I cover this section, right? Again, remember, this is the first session for our Verbal Life Prep students. And it's very important to understand how we learn and how should you make use of the e-GMAT resources. Okay. So fundamentally, for everyone, there are 3 stages of learning. If you're beginning your preparation for the GMAT, the first stage is absorption. You'll be flooded with a lot of new concepts. You'll look at verb-ing modifiers, noun plus noun modifiers, parallel lists, nested lists, bunch of things. And in the first stage, you should absorb each and every concept individually and make sure you understand it. In the e-GMAT concept file, we teach you all the concepts. In Verbal Life Prep, there are about 100 concept files. And what's nice about each concept file is, at the end of each file, you have what we call as a post-assessment quiz. So each file is about 15 minutes, which actually makes it very consumable even during your lunchtime while you're working. And at the end of those 15 minutes, you actually have a quiz, a post-assessment quiz, which tests you just on that concept. And this is, I'd say, our means of what we call as quality control. What we ensure is, if in the post-assessment quiz you don't do really well, we recommend that you go back and do the concept again. And this is very, very different from studying from a book, because if you read a book, if 1,000 people read a book, each one of them will actually have a different level of understanding once they read a chapter. But the problem really is there's very little quality control. There's really no feedback mechanism that tells you how well you've learned that chapter. But with in our courses you do, and make sure you make use of those. Once you've learned a bunch of concepts, you should learn how to apply them, because fundamentally just knowing concepts isn't enough. GMAT tests your applications. And throughout the GMAT course, we have what we call as about 25 application files or so, and probably around 30, I don't recall the exact number, where we teach you how to apply concepts. So for example, in our SC course, we have about 14 application files that are spread across the entire SC course. Once you learn a bunch of concepts, those application files teach you how to apply those concepts to solve real GMAT problems. And then once you've been through the course, you come to the live sessions. That's where we deduce where your problems are, where you have gaps in your understanding, and that kind of helps you reach a higher level. So before every live session, there's a bunch of preparation, which is, you've got to study the relevant concept files, you've got to study the relevant application files, and then you come in. And in the live session, we solve what we call as 700 level problems, and that's where we expose your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so again, that's something that is there. I'm going to just move this mess or Mr. Guha. We can talk about TOEFL at the end of the session, please. Okay. So for verbal online students, if you don't have access to live, then verbal online is our most popular course. Make sure you actually go through this path. Make sure you do the 100 plus concept files. Actually, it's 140, 150 or so. Do the 40 plus application files. At the end of every application file, we have a list of OG questions that we recommend that you do. Make sure you do those. Okay. Even if you've done those questions, repeat those questions, because in our opinion, they help you apply the concepts a lot better. Another thing that is there with e-GMAT courses are that they're divided into levels. So at the end of every level, we have level qualifying exercise that gives you feedback on how well you're doing. And there are about 9 level qualifying exercises in this. And as you go through it, you will have solved about 1,600 questions. Okay, and these concept files, these application files, the list of OG questions, and the level qualifying exercises, they're all a part of your dashboard. Okay, and yes, you can access the files repeatedly in the 6 months of subscription period that you have. So in addition to this, for those of you who are in verbal live prep, you also get the live sessions, you also get the workshops, and workshops are again at the end of live sessions. Workshops are like mini mocks which are proctored, which we ask you to take, and at the end of every workshop we do an analysis and figure out what your percentile level is. It's probably the best way to assess your percentile level outside of GMAT prep, and we tell you what are the areas that you need to work on. Okay, so in terms of the foundation concepts, here is a list of foundation concepts that we have. Again, guys, I'll be happy to respond to this. Give me just 5 minutes in terms of the price of the course and other things. So in terms of the foundation concepts, and this is a part of the e-GMAT free trial as well, we talk about sentence structure, we talk about importance of meaning. In fact, meaning and sentence correction is a term that e-GMAT coined it was about 14 months before Manhattan GMAT talked about it. So really a very, very high focus on meaning. Again, a bunch of these are a part of the free trial. And again, the reason we are probably the only company that has these concepts is because we realize that these are the skills that you need to ace the GMAT. And as you ace them, you see improvement in your scores. These are the core skills that you really need. Similarly, in the core concepts, and this is just the SC course, not FCCR and RC and IR combined, but just the sentence correction course. We have 26 concept files, over 300 plus examples and exercise files. And in addition to that, every e-GMAT course comes with instructor support. So if you have a doubt, we have dedicated forums where you can post questions, and only instructors respond to those questions. So we have, excuse me, for example, for the SC course, we've responded to over 3,500 queries in the last 2 years or so. Again, here are a few of the concepts that you can see in the free trial. Again, just in the SC course, you have, I think it's about 12 application files now. and a bunch of these, and you have one application file that is a part of the free trial. In addition to that, one of the other things that we have done is added something which we call as in-depth series. We realize that there are certain concepts that people are very, very confused with, and examples of such concepts are usage of as and like, importance of meaning, change meaning, and we have 4 files that talk about as versus like. It's the most comprehensive coverage of as versus like anywhere on the planet. Similarly, for meaning change, we have 50 questions. I think more questions than what anyone else has in the SC course. Here is a list of live sessions that we have, and again, you'd find that it's way more comprehensive than any other offering that is out there. Verbal Light Prep students also get 4 workshops that help. These are like mini mocks that help them assess their percentile and what to do next. Verbal online students only get the verbal workshop. And yes, you can have access to lessons anytime. As I said, the recordings are there. How does our course compare with the best books out there and the best courses out there? You can really see that. And again, regardless of what you look at, you would find that our courses are way more comprehensive. I'm going to actually just skip through this very quickly. So in the end, I'm actually coming to the end of the session. The way you should look at a particular course is you should look at whether the course is complete, whether it offers everything that you need to ace the GMAT, whether it teaches application, because remember, concepts don't do you any good unless and until you learn applications. Whether it offers ample practice, does it come with support, and does it have a proven history of success? And on all 5 metrics, you'd find our verbal online or verbal live prep courses are way better than the competition. Once again, I want to have certain takeaways. First of all, GMAT is a test of application, not just awareness of concepts. A lot of people really come to me and say, I've been studying for GMAT for so many months, and I still score a V25 or a V19 or a V30. What do I do? And how can your course help? To those students, my response really is that you guys are aware of what's tested. You don't really know how to apply the concepts, and consequently, you do not have the ability. Okay, your score improves when your ability improves. Okay, and you improve your ability by building on your core skills. Even people who've been studying for 6 months for the GMAT don't understand how to divide a sentence into clauses, don't understand how to infer meaning, do not understand how to do negation, and those are core skills that you need. Okay, these people focus a lot on timing. One of the things that I don't understand that we haven't discussed in this session, but we discuss in our free session, is your timing is an outcome of your core skills. Okay, the reason you spend a lot of time on a particular question is because when you look at an answer choice, you're confused with it. The reason you're confused with an answer choice is because you don't understand the meaning of a word completely, as some of you were in the boldface question. And where does that come to? What does that boil down to? It boils down to the core skill. If you have clarity on core skills, you can make decisions faster, which impacts your timing tremendously. And I think the last one is very, very apparent. One thing that I really recommend is that you take our free trial and see for yourself. There are very few companies that offer a free trial, and we offer a very comprehensive free trial. And you can see what all is there in our free trial. And the great thing would be to start with a diagnostic score. All right, at this point, I'll be happy to take any questions over here. Here is the link for the next week's free session once again. So how much do the courses cost? So if you want to really see the price of courses, you can go to our buy page. If you do not have a credit card, there are people in India who do not have a credit card, and you can also pay using net banking. Credit card is a preferred means of payment, but you can also pay using net banking. And to do that, you write to us as rajat@e-GMAT.com. What is 48 in quants and percentile? My guess is that in 75, 76 would be my guess. Again, you can look that up. If you are a verbal live prep students, then when will we have the live classroom? It starts next week, Kritika, with the CR1 session. How do you convert your GPA to the US score, US scale? Go ask your university. I think they have a conversion scale. Every university is slightly different. Okay. So Gunjan, your question. Would more practice help improve your timing? Building your core skills will help improve your timing. More practice will not directly help improve your timing. How do I prep for each live prep class? Well, we have the presentation, we have our notes. We spend about an hour and a half preparing for each live prep class. Do we cover IR as the part of e-GMAT course? Yes, we do. We have probably the world's most comprehensive IR course. You can know about it over here. Excuse me. Um, and you can really see some of the feedback that our students give us uh, over here. So Deshna, if you are a verbal live prep student, if you intend to attend verbal live prep from next week onwards, then I would recommend you focus on verbal now, but make sure you keep a dedicated 15 days for quant. How about AWA? We do not have anything for AWA, but trust me, once you go through our CR sessions, you won't need any help on AWA. And this comes from an experience of close to 5,500 students, and where people haven't come back to us and asked for help on AWA. What are the prerequisites before a session? See your study plan. The prerequisites are very clearly listed out before every session. Gaurav, no. The answer is no. So the question really is, would you advise that we complete everything before you come to the sessions? No, and that's kind of where the study plan comes in. So in the study plan, and then you can download the study plan from our blogs. You actually have the prerequisites before every session. There's an itemized listing of every concept file that you need to do before every session. So if you go here, you should be able to download the study plan as well. You don't need to complete all the CR concepts. For example, prior to the CR1 session, you only need to put in about 6 to 7 hours. Actually, 6 is even a longer shot. About 4 to 5 hours of work where you need to go through the premise and conclusion and the inference files. So Arnab, you can pay using credit card. That would be a preferred method. What that does is it allows us to really have everything happen automatically. You get access to the course within 30 seconds of your payment going through. But you can also pay using net banking. And if you pay using net banking, so you write to me at rajat@e-GMAT.com if you want to pay using net banking. And we usually provide you access within 12 hours or so. So thank you, Goha. Yes, please make sure you follow the study plan. And if you have any questions, please write to support@e-GMAT.com. Arnab, again, write to us at support, and you'll get an email with the account details and everything. So Priyanka, the reason why that happens is because your bank actually makes that conversion. It's not us. So we are more generous that way. So actually, quant prep, something that is as good as e-GMAT. Unfortunately, there's nothing that is as good as e-GMAT that exists out there for quant. But if you were to really look at it, I'd say look at Jeff Sackman's book. I would say look at e-GMAT quant books till Chiranjeev launches our quant course. What is the difference between verbal online and verbal live prep? Both of them actually are excellent courses. Verbal online is the world's most reviewed online course. I'd like to think about it in this way. If you are someone who said, I'm going to study from books and I am going to study on my own, I do not need to come in a classroom to study. And then verbal online is the course for you. It's for those of you who want to study independently without much help. Those folks who need instructor help should take on verbal light prep. Is the syllabus for verbal online the same as verbal light prep? Yes, both of them are complete courses. Both of them cover everything that is tested on the GMAT. So the syllabus is the same, except if you look at the study plans, the verbal live prep study plan will have the live sessions in there. Other than that, that's kind of the fundamental difference. The other piece is verbal live prep also offers the 4-point score improvement guarantee that you need for retakers. With e-GMAT, is it possible for someone to score from V20 to V36? Possible, yes. It depends on your diligence. I mean, here is a guy who improved from V21, someone who was very much in your shoes, improved from V21 to V41. But again, remember, you have to be very, very diligent to do that. Where can you get the study plan for verbal live prep? You can download everything from our blogs. Joel, there are no live sessions on Fridays. So everything that is there is on Saturday and Sunday. So, and yes, I mean, technically it does, but if you've attended the recordings, then, we still honor our guarantee. Fundamentally, guys, the terms of the guarantee, even though we have a specific set of terms, what we really look for is, have you followed the course diligently? And have you put in the time? The only time we'll not honor the guarantee is if you've done, let's say, 60% of the course and you come back and say, hey, I didn't improve, give me my money back. That is not acceptable because you didn't do your part. But if you've done your part, if you've put in the time, and if you still don't improve, then we'll give you your money back. I mean, if you put in the effort, and if you've not benefited, then we don't need your money. Jaydev, if you have 30 days only, then take the recording of our of our strategy session 2. That would help you tremendously, and go to our blog page. So go to our blog page and look at the recording of Define Your Strategy session 2. Or you can have this over here as well. It will precisely tell you when you should do this. I don't know. I understand if you work in shifts, and again, that's where the access is for 6 months. You don't need to cover everything in just one batch, right? And our workshops, a lot of them are open for the entire week. And they are on demand. And the analysis is when you have to be present physically. So, Priyanka, the nice thing about our plan really is that it is all done what I call as asynchronously. So we give you a sequence of concepts that you need to do. If you can spend 4 hours in a day, gobble everything up, right? It's a sequence that's important. Does that help, Priyanka? Yes, Jagan. The terms of the guarantee, if you really want to see the exact terms, you can see them here on our blog. And yes, you can watch a recording of this later. In fact, we'll have the recording of this on our Facebook page. So here is a link to our Facebook page. Priyanka, build your core skills should be the strategy. Just doing more questions is not going to help you, but as you build your core skills, you would really see it improve. Topics in CR for great ROI. Inference, number 1. It's the most core topic, and then assumptions. And then, of course, if you ace these two, others would be a lot easier to ace. Okay. To get Q51, I would say use GMAT club test, use Jeff Sackman's book, and be very, very diligent. Where can you find free mock tests? ROI and RC, pretty high, Abhijit. Again, any course like e-GMAT for quants, no, that doesn't have enough. There isn't a course for quants that is similar, unless and until CJ Chiranjeev releases the e-GMAT quant course. Do we have a schedule for the verbal live course? Actually, let me share the files for the session, and we'll also share the schedule for the verbal live course. Here are the session files, and here is the schedule for the verbal live prep course. What are my suggestions for quant? Again, take a mock test and figure out your areas of weakness. See the recording of strategy session 2, and then look at it. Okay. Parag, Grocket, we no longer work with Grocket. In fact, when we worked with Grocket, we didn't have workshops. So to supplement that, we've added workshops, and we'll be adding some very exciting new features pretty soon in the offering. Abhijit, don't worry about idioms in SC. If you're doing the e-GMAT SC course, you'll be pretty well trained on them. Oh yes, Ashish. One of the things that e-GMAT that we follow is we allow you to start anywhere. So, for example, if you are a verbal online student, you can upgrade to verbal live prep by paying the difference. Again, write to us at e-GMAT. Write to me at rajat at e-GMAT.com, and you'd be able to upgrade. Or you can go to our buy page and look at verbal live add-on. That's at the bottom of the page. Okay. How many months do you need to prepare for the GMAT? If you are at the startup phase, actually you need about 200 hours to prepare. How many months does that translate to depends on your personal situation. But one thing that I've seen people do that in a month. I've seen people not be able to do this in 6 months just because they're not diligent. So again, you need about 200 hours. That's what you should budget. If you're struggling in RC Arnab, look at our RC course. You can. One of the nice things is you can buy just the individual course. That's something that we offer. How do you locate 700 plus questions in the e-GMAT course? You don't. You actually go through the levels, and as you go from one level to the other, the questions start to become more challenging. Starting level 2, we have 700 level questions. Priyanka, I would not recommend that you mix them at this time. Okay, 200 hours out of this, I'd say about 155 hours for verbal and about 45 hours for quant. If you are someone who's not strong in both quant and verbal, then you have to add more time, of course. All right, thank you very much, guys. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the session. Are we planning to touch upon TOEFL? No, because the reason really is once you do the GMAT, you don't need to study for TOEFL. And trust me, this is coming from a guy who actually studied for TOEFL for about 2 hours. The reverse is not true, by the way. But if you ace the GMAT, you don't need to study for TOEFL.